Welcome back to the In Your Mind podcast. We have an exciting episode today with Jenna, and Jenna is going to be talking about the humanistic approach and how that kind of looks in her practice and how she sees it. In your mind, how has your environment kind of shaped what you do today? To more get an idea of like why you chose to go into like humanistic psychology.
Yeah.
I don't know, what's been your life experience
Right.
that's led you to the place you're in today?
Said, like, without going into my own like deep dark secrets, my environment growing up kind of always had me asking questions as to like the whys. Like, why do people do the things that they do? Why do they act the way that they do? What was their reasoning behind it? That kind of stuff. Or like, why did mom or dad say this? Or, why do I think my friend so-and-so did this? And not necessarily as a means of like taking it personally. Don't get me wrong. There definitely were times where, it was more so, trying to figure out what was their motivation behind it. Or even in movies, I was trying to figure people out or figure out the characters and, trying to figure out their behavior, what caused it to happen, what happened to them at whatever point in time to make these things kind of manifest today. And my one friend kind of jokes with me now, and because I still ask some of these questions and she catches me in them. And even though I have more of an educated guess or an idea of what some of those answers could be, she always jokes around and says like, Jenna, like not everything is that deep. Like you don't have to think that much into it. And as much as I understand that the point of her joke is to essentially try and slow me down and remind me to turn the therapist brain off and to just ground myself in being human and allowing myself to be along for the ride, knowing what I know now, it's like, okay, yes, a lot of things, they are actually quite literally that deep. So I guess like that's my long-winded kind of roundabout way of saying that after doing my own work and, being in my own therapy and working through my own stuff, is that like all of my questions and my wonderments were kind of my own way of, what's what I'm looking for, like intellectualizing the whys or intellectualizing every little thing that's kind of happened either around me or to me, rather than fully processing those emotions and kind of appreciating it or, processing the emotions that were associated with it. And now like the second part as well with that is my environment, as with most people's environments, because this is a big part of the society and the culture that we kind of live in. It ingrained us, or it ingrained me, I can only really speak for myself, that, you have to be a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way. And we're taught that we can't make mistakes, otherwise you're a failure, or you're not good enough, or you can't, you have to know everything, otherwise you're incompetent. And I can go on and on about that for what probably feels like forever. But because it's so mostly and deeply ingrained in us, a lot of us, we live lives that kind of take us away from who we want to be because of the fast-paced culture that we live in. So we have like these biases and these beliefs that lead us to being so disconnected from our own humanness. That's the word I wanted to use, humanness. Like our own dreams, our own ideas, our own desires, and the things that we actually wholeheartedly want, because we're so connected to trying to make it in our fast-paced world that that's not even structurally or fundamentally designed to support our mental health or our well-being. And most of us are making so many moves that end up taking us away from the person that we want to be or the life that we want to live, because we're taught that that's essentially how we survive. So I kind of carry those things into my own practice while being sure to bring my own humanness into my sessions, not only as a means of showing up authentically for myself and my client, but also showing them that there can be kind of safety and, being human and whatever that means for you.
So how would you kind of see if somebody's kind of like really caught up in that like rush cycle and not really doing what their intentions are for life, or like not living in accordance to it, but they really want to, and they're getting caught up with like the rush and like society's expectations? Like what would be like the first thing that you kind of like can point to like get them out of that?
Yeah. Usually it's like taking a look at, okay, like what's working for you? Is this actually working for you? Is it not? And a lot of people, it's like the first time where they've stopped and have been like, oh my God, like, no, this isn't working for me, or this isn't what I want. This is kind of an expectation that whether it's my mom's put on me or whoever's put on me, it's not even, if it were up to me, I would go and have my own art studio, or I'd be a dance teacher. I wouldn't be in accounting or whatever this job is that's no longer giving me any sort of fulfillment kind of thing. So taking a look at, okay, is this actually what you want for yourself, right? If you envision the life that you want for yourself, is this it, or is it something completely different?
And I feel like that would be quite a hard-hitting question, or quite like a reality check for some people. And do some people, like, I feel like there'd be variations in response to a question like that.
Yeah.
Like, are most people welcoming of that?
Some are, yes. Some are also very afraid of like what that change might mean, because a lot of people kind of already have that in the back of their heads and already know that, okay, this isn't what I want, or isn't what I'm looking for, or what I'm trying to work towards, but there's safety in it because I'm comfortable. I know what to expect. Trying to uproot all of that and figure out what I actually want, I don't know if there's safety in that. So like the unknowingness, it's not really a word, but we're going to use it anyways. The fear of the unknown, I guess, is kind of what I find shakes a lot of people up, of like, I know what I have to do and I know what might bring me towards, who I want to be, but the fear of what am I going to lose in the process a lot of times gets people stuck.
Yeah. So do you use like the humanistic approach in your therapy? And like, what is that? Like, how is that different?
So in terms of like actual skills themselves, is that what you're referring to?
Just like as a whole, like what is like humanistic psychology, if somebody has never heard of it before?
Yeah.
How does it look for you?
Yeah. So humanistic psychology, it's based on the idea that everybody and every human is unique and they have their own inherent goodness. So it has a very strong emphasis on understanding that the individual as a whole person is important, while also focusing on individual experiences, personal growth, and the inherent worth of each individual. So there's no one size fits all approach because of that emphasis on the uniqueness and whatever complexities kind of come along with being a human. It's also not about pathologizing behavior. It's more so to lead to those self-discoveries that are going to foster that kind of personal growth. And it's also believing that most people already have, I shouldn't say most people, everybody has mostly free will, and the answers within themselves. It's just a matter of providing them with the space to kind of help them get there. And one of the central concepts of humanistic psychology is that idea of self-actualization and being and becoming one's truest form of themselves and living in their authenticity. So essentially like becoming oneself, maintaining oneself, and continuing to kind of flourish and evolve within that. So we all have an innate tendency to strive towards realizing what our full potential is and becoming the best versions of ourselves. That's kind of like the summary of, off the top of my head, of humanistic psychology.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that like works really perfectly with kind of what you were saying before of like when somebody comes to see you and you ask like what position they're currently in, and if they are like living in that state of where they want to be, or if they're really far from it, and kind of helping them see what it is that they want. And that, I can see how those two things kind of pair together.
Right, yeah. The free will is like such an important piece of it. Like I say to my clients all the time, like you have free will. Like at any point you could, like in this very moment, you could get up and flip your table. You won't, but like you could, like you could, it's just like a poor example, but like you really could at any moment go and do whatever it is that you want to do. It's a matter of, do I go and do it?
And I think a lot of that is like courage and
Mm-hmm.
stepping out of your comfort zone. And that is the thing that like needs to be supported as well, because I think like I know for myself, like struggling with confidence or like courage at some points of time, but like when you
Yeah,
get over the other, like over that hump, there's always so much on the other side and it's always so
absolutely.
worth it. But just take that step
Yes.
is really hard, I
Yes.
feel. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's like one of the foundational pieces, not necessarily in humanistic psychology, but in like one of the modalities that I do use, where it talks a lot about like experiential avoidance. Like a lot of times, because we're in fast-paced lives, or even just being in a society that doesn't necessarily welcome uncomfortable feelings, we avoid them altogether, right? So it's like I do X, Y, and Z, whether it's, engaging in drugs and alcohol or other kinds of addictions or overeating, or just plain straight up avoidance of the situation itself, right? We go and we avoid those things because it's like, well, I don't want to feel the anxiety. I don't want to feel the uncomfortability of having to face what might be disappointing or might be uncomfortable in some way, right? So it's like, and it's learning to kind of push past those feelings of allowing them to be there and accepting them to be there, while also being like, they can be here and I can still go and do the really hard thing, because I know at the end of the day it will bring me to the person that I want to be in the life that I want to live.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like even like I guess a more minute version of that would just be like my version of that would be like turning on the TV instead of doing something that I want to do. Like it's a distraction.
Right.
And it's just like, no, I don't want to think about that right now. Just
Right.
I'm going to turn off my brain completely and it's just going to start to melt. Like it feels like that.
Right.
But sometimes I just do it anyway. And I'm just like, nah, like I'm not dealing with it.
Yeah.
And then that's the kind of way that I see that in my life.
Right, yeah. Because we do live in a world where it's so easy to be distracted or avoid whatever uncomfortable feeling that we're feeling. It's like, oh, I'm just going to scroll on TikTok or Instagram for hours on end, or I'm going to watch TV or whatever it is to numb myself out from not having to feel it.
And what kind of consequences do you think we're seeing from like that easy availability of like numbness, like and distraction?
I think like in general terms, like just like a disconnection from ourselves. Like people come and they're like, I don't know what I want because I don't know how to make big life decisions, because a lot of times at the core of it is because I'm disconnected from my emotions. Our emotions are huge communicators to us about like how to navigate life and how to make those big decisions and how to be in connection with ourselves and our own intuition. And it's like, if we've disconnected from feeling them, we don't know the messages or don't know how to decode or understand the messages that these emotions are trying to kind of communicate to us in those moments. That, I think, for me, in my opinion, is kind of like the biggest consequence of just how far away it pulls people away from like their own inner knowing.
Yeah. What do you think for someone who, I guess the person who realizes that they're in a position where they've disconnected from their emotions and they don't know what they really want, but they, like kind of what you asked before, but how do you go about finding, like it sounds so cliche, but finding yourself again and what you actually want, and trying to figure out or first understanding that your emotions, like you said, are there for a reason, and understanding what they're saying. How do you go about decoding that and understanding what it's trying to tell you about your situation?
Right. I think at the heart of it, it's more so expanding your tolerance for feeling it, and also expanding your own flexibility of accepting what they might be trying to communicate to you, even if it's information that you might not necessarily want to hear, right? A lot of times it's like, oh, whether it's like quitting my job or leaving a relationship or whatever else, it might not be the information that we want. But it's also important of what it's communicating, because we do have communicating, or emotions are communicating different things to us, or even just our body and our reactions, right? If I'm around this certain person, something feels off, whether it's you know, I'm feeling heightened anxiety or I'm feeling shut down, like those are also huge communicators as well.
I think it was interesting, like when you were saying at the start, what kind of brought you into humanistic psychology and like psychology in general was wanting to go like deeper and know more about like why the world was the way that it is, or like why somebody's reacting in that way.
Right.
And for me, like what that really is just like being curious. Like
Yeah.
that is just like curiosity for life.
Yes.
Like if there's a possibility of maybe drawing in that, or like can you teach somebody curiosity to go, I wonder like what that emotion is, and then instead of like more identifying with it, or instead of going, oh, this feels really bad, like I'm feeling anxious, like this might mean I have to quit my job, but is there a way to go about it that kind of detaches that, or that you can stay curious with it?
Yeah. There's a ton of skills that kind of work towards kind of fostering more of that curiosity, right? Of that open-mindedness. So there's a few skills that are kind of like coming to the top of my head now, where it's, you know, where initially we like notice whatever's coming up, whether it's an emotion, whether it's a thought. And the second part of it is, with that noticing, you're just bringing awareness to it with that openness and with that curiosity. So you're taking a look at it kind of from the lens of like a curious scientist, of just saying like, okay, it's here. You don't necessarily have to find a meaning behind it in that moment, or like try and make sense of it or intellectualize it in that moment, but we're noticing it. And we're not attaching any sort of judgments to it, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it feels like hell or whatever else. We're noticing it from just a place of that openness and curiosity. Just learning to sit with it essentially, and expanding that window of tolerance for it, because for a lot of people it's a very narrow window.
Yeah, it's becoming very apparent that, as you said, as we progress and as like the direction society and culture is kind of going with all this distraction and stuff, it's becoming more and more important to survive, to be able to tolerate these emotions.
Right.
And if you struggle to be able to sit with them, then you can't really, you know, distill out the things that it's trying to tell you.
Right.
If you just turn the other way all the time. But it's easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But I think also too, like the world that we live in is such a huge factor. Like I don't blame people for wanting to numb out all the time.
Yeah.
Like we have access to so much information all the time, whether it's on our phones, on the radio, on the computer, TV, what have it. And then the chaos that's going on like all over the world, like people are responding to all of these things by numbing out, because it's a lot for a brain to handle. We're not meant to be consuming all of this information all of the time, and especially all of this really, for a lot of people, traumatic, like heavy stuff. Like it's our brain's way of, like you said, like trying to protect us, trying to ensure our survival, because it's a lot. We can't consume all of this all of the time.
It kind of reminds me of like, you know, when you have like something like your response of flight or fight, and then freeze.
Yeah.
The freeze aspect of like a threat, when you're like seeing so much that you're just like, nah, I'm gonna just pause and just like turn off my brain and like distract.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it is that freeze response, that state of overwhelm.
So do you know much about like how that affects your nervous system by like continually choosing freeze?
Well, so with those like responses, like from our automatic nervous system, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze, they're not things we necessarily choose for ourselves. That's the point where it's like, okay, free will, okay. But those responses, they're automatic from our brain, because that has been what's helped us evolve and survive over time, are those responses. So your brain before you even have a second to process what's happening, it's jumped into automatically without you giving a thought to it. It's as automatic as breathing. It's jumped into whatever response that it needs to. So typically it starts out with fight or flight, right? Your brain assesses like, okay, can I run away from this or can I fight it? If it deems that neither of those things are going to be helpful, or if it's tried those options and has exhausted those options, it jumps into freeze. So like as our state of overwhelm or anxiety kind of continues, we hit a point where essentially like helplessness kind of turns in, and we hit a state of collapse, and it's to preserve our own energy, right? So it's, if we're out in the wilderness and we're, faced with a tiger, we know running away from it and fighting it's not going to get us very far. So instead, our body's going to go, no, shut down and play dead, essentially collapse, because that's going to be your safest option, is to lay down and slowly breathing and pretend like it's not happening, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's so true, because I feel like so much of social media, you don't have the fight or flight option. Like you kind of, it's like a car crash, you can't look away, so you're not going to like run away from it, and you can't put your fist through the screen and fight them.
Right.
So you kind of just like default to freeze over and over and over again, because there is really nothing you can do about it. And I think like,
are you talking about like the stage in which like you've been scrolling for a while, and when you like don't even know what you're doing, like you come off it and you're like, I can't tell you one thing that I saw. Like, is that like the freeze aspect?
I don't know if like that's the freeze aspect itself. I think I'm just, what you're describing is like that being triggered over and over again, and you're just at the point where you're just exhausted because you've just been bombarded with all this stuff that you have no control over. And it's really not good for you to be exposed to that, like you said, because, even if you were in that situation, there's not much you can do at this point in time anyway. So it's probably best that you don't expose yourself to that. And I think a lot of people are coming to the conclusion that like, I should just not spend as much time on social media because of that reason. Like you just have to remove yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that does come around a lot, I find, for a lot of people, is they feel like they feel like a bad person if they like turn off the news or come off of social media, and they're like, oh, if I'm not aware of what's going on in the world, then I feel like I'm not being a good citizen, or, I'm ignorant or whatever else. And it's like, it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to not know everything all the time. Like it's okay to have, information or whatever, but it's also okay to recognize when you've hit a point of it being just way too much.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. And I think your social aspects would come into it as well. Like I know, thinking about more of like my grandparents' generation and like them really listening to the news a lot, but like that's kind of what their peers and stuff also do, and they also talk about. So that's kind of like their conversational topics.
Okay.
So if you're not listening to the news as much, it's like, would you be then scared of like losing that connection almost with your peers? Or so for like our generation, it would be like, oh, did you see this thing on TikTok?
Right.
And a lot of the time I don't know what people are referring to. It's like, I don't know what that is. Right. And I feel a little bit out of the loop, but it's something that you have to then work through. Like you're like, okay, well that's such a small aspect of our connection. Like that's not even, that's not deep. That's just like, oh, familiarity. Yeah. And that's it. Like it's actually, yeah. But it can feel a little bit like, oh, I'm not in the know.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I really like the point that you made too about like there being so many other aspects to like form connections versus like just this one little thing.
Yeah.
So there are a few different like modalities that I draw from to use in therapy, but at the heart of it is mostly like relationship based. So they say that there's studies where it's like 90% of client success is like based off of like the relationship between the client and the therapist, and then the remaining 10% is based off of the skills that you learn, or like the things that you learn about yourself and whatever else. So that's kind of where I pour my whole heart and soul into, is like making sure that I show up as like my authentic and genuine self to, you know, foster that kind of relationship, or do what I can to make sure that it feels safe and comfortable for the other person. Another kind of piece that kind of sits at the heart of it is acceptance and commitment therapy. So it uses concepts of mindfulness to kind of connect to the present moment, acceptance to make space for our thoughts and those uncomfortable emotions. And it's also very much values-based. So using those values-based actions to kind of be able to commit to those moves that are going to help us build the lives that we want for ourselves, and help us become closer to the person that we want to be. So at the core of it, it's not necessarily trying to challenge or change any sort of pieces of our experience or whatever our thoughts or emotions are, but it's more so creating space for them and enhancing our own like flexibility and tolerance, to be able to kind of handle the ups and downs that life has to offer us.
When you say like values-based, do you mean like what values do you mean?
Yeah, so there's actually like a huge list. I think there's like 60 values on this list that I give a lot of clients, where it's like, and it's like anything. It's like creativity, fun, authenticity, playfulness, beauty, fitness. Like it's like it's any value you could probably ever have. And it really helps us kind of too, taking a look at what those values are, and connecting more with our values, taking a look at, okay, have I really been connected to these values that have brought me to this state or like point in my life that I am right now? And if I haven't been, how can I now use those to help me and help guide me towards building the things that I want to be building and living that more enriching and fulfilling life for myself?
Yeah, I feel like that's a great way to get more at the depth of like, it's kind of like the self-actualizing aspect to it, of like your purpose or your goals or what you want to achieve can be broader through values, because it might not be like, oh, I want to be a pilot. Why do you want to be a pilot? Like, or something like a career is usually based on values. Like for me, psychology, it's like curiosity, bettering myself, trying to help others, like learning more about the world, like very similar to your kind of your kind of path to psychology as well, I guess. Yeah, so I feel like the values approach is awesome. Do some people come in and they don't know their values, or
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Then that's why there's like this huge list, because it's like I don't even know what my, like people say like, oh, like family, or like, you know, the good ones like relationships, connections, like all those great things. And it's like, okay, well, there might be even more to that might kind of help us get unstuck here. So connecting with those values can help us in so many different ways, of kind of like what we talked about earlier, we're like pushing past that anxiety, or pushing past that like uncomfortability of, you know, trying something new or stepping outside of the comfort zone. Knowing that it's a part of our values, it might, in a lot of cases, help us push past those things, because it studies show that it helps us move towards those like our goals, essentially helps us make those towards moves, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you found that like when you perhaps would give them this test or whatever to see what their values are, is it about embodying the values that brings them the state of being that they're looking for, I guess is the right word? Or is it just recognizing that's what they are and then committing to becoming that helps the most? Like, is it about being the person that you want to be, or it's becoming the person that you want to be? Because I feel like a lot of people bring themselves down or feel guilty that they're not doing the things they should because they're not the person that they want to be. But is it about being the person that they want to be? Or
A little bit of both, honestly. Like I've had people kind of look at those values lists and be like, well, this is what I want to be, but it's not necessarily what I'm doing right now. And sometimes it's more so starting out with, okay, well, what are we doing right now that we can kind of connect with? And then how can we build on that by kind of bringing in more of those pieces that we want to kind of bring more into our lives, kind of thing, if that makes sense. Yeah, because that has come up a lot where like people, they're looking at this and they're highlighting it and they're going, okay, well, I know that these are all very important, but they're not necessarily things that I do. And it's like, okay, well, let's just start with the things that you're currently doing, and from there build on the pieces that we do want. Because like you said, we don't want to shame people into the, well, I know I should be doing this, or this one sounds good, but it's like, I want you, in order to foster your authenticity and what makes sense for you, just focus right now on the ones that are you. And a lot of times they forget about the ones that they think that they should be doing or want to be doing. And they're like, okay, then I'm happy with my decisions of, connecting with these ones and that being enough for me.
It's kind of like that idea of like the atomic habits, or like getting something basic and like really honing that in and doing it over and over again. And once you have that like really set, it's like you get enough confidence to then branch out to the next one. But like I feel like it would be important to go, oh, these are all the things that I do have, and not be like, these are all the things you don't have, and then you're coming from a place of shame which doesn't bring you energy, or like you don't want to expand, if that's what you're coming from.
Yes, yeah. More so like learning, like, what does it mean to be me based on what I currently am, and like bringing acceptance and like love into that versus like who they think they should be or what they should be doing based off of whoever's expectations, right?
Yeah. I think that's really important because a lot of people at the bottom feel like they're not doing anything right.
Yeah.
But they are. They just aren't aware of the things that they are doing right. And if, you can focus on that, like what you focus on grows. So if you like, just figure out one thing that you're doing right, and everyone has one thing, you can go from there. So I think that's really good.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that like really inspires you, or that you really focus on within the humanistic like literature, or like theorists? Like, is there anyone that you've like read books on, or that you studied, that you continually like reflect on, or you think of?
When I thought of this question, it wasn't more so, I don't know if they're actually like humanistic based, but they are two psychologists who do, what's the word I'm looking for? Who, like, again, it's not so, they do really great work. That was a weird way of putting it, but I would say either Janina Fisher. She's a really great psychologist, and she's done a lot of fundamental work in the mental health field in terms of like managing and treating trauma, as well as Gabor Mate. I think I say his name wrong every time, and I hate myself for it, but here we are.
I can't say
it, but they steer away from pathologizing symptoms or like human behavior, and they more so view it they more so view these manifestations as being adaptive to how we've had to kind of survive emotionally since birth till now. And they have more of a lens of like that compassionate inquiry rather than viewing the symptoms as this devilish being or something that we should be ashamed of. And they focus a lot on that trauma and inner child work. And they've done, like I said, they've done some really groundbreaking work in the mental health and trauma field. So those, I think, right now in this very moment, are like my two big ones for like inspiration, or that have kind of been really big in either my learning or like what it means to be a therapist kind of thing in that lens.
Do you think, so in your like therapist life and like with your clients, do you think there's a very much a difference between like how you act there and then how you act like around your friends and like in the real in the real world, I guess, and what does the separation?
100%. 100%. Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%. Sometimes I go to my friends and it's like I say to them all the time, like I am a therapist, I swear.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely, while bringing my own authenticity and like who I am into our sessions, or like bringing humor and whatever else, like there is that separation between, but it is hard. Like I do find turning my therapist brain off very challenging at times, especially when meeting new people, because again I go into like trying to figure them out, if like, doing that, or why did they say that, or what did right,
Yeah.
or I hear little pieces that like trigger the therapist's brain to turn back on, and it's like nope, like I have to intentionally be like nope, turn it off, like that's not what we're doing. It's not fair to be like an emotional, you know, looking through their window kind of thing, or that kind of stuff. So definitely a hard separation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Why do you think that separation is important? Because you obviously have studied or gone into therapy because you've had that natural tendency to and curiosity to understand. So why do you think it's important to step away from that in outside of the therapy sessions?
Well, for one, it's a lot of work for me, so it's more so of like that setting boundaries kind of piece of it. And two, a lot of people don't actually want that. Like I've had friends, you know, just say to me sometimes where I have forgotten to turn that piece off, where they've been like, I just want my friend right now, I don't want a therapist.
Right.
Or like a family member, you know, I just want, you know, whether it was like my mom or something, I just want my daughter right now, I don't necessarily want a therapist. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right, I got it, I'll come back. So a lot of times, it's not what they want.
Is it ever the opposite? Like, does anyone ever go, oh, like, can you bring your therapist ideas into this? Like, how could I solve this?
It is, yeah. I have a friend of mine who jokes, she'll be like, I'll bring the wine or I'll bring the coffee and like you bring the DSM. Like she's like, so there are friends who are like, I need you to help me figure out what's going on with this person and like how to deal with it. So there are those pieces and those times too, but
yeah, because I feel like for me, all of my relationships are quite different with my friends and family, and some of them we do have like very like, it's not like poking holes in each other, but it's like trying to work things out together on like a level that's like, I wonder why this is happening. But then there's other friendships and like other times where it's like that side of you isn't on at all, and you're just like having fun splashing at the beach, and you're just like, so I think it is also different with like different people and what the times are calling for.
Exactly. So I've gotten into I shouldn't say I've gotten into a good habit, but I'm getting better at kind of asking like, what do you need? What part of me do you need right now? Do you want advice? Do you just need me to listen? Do you want to know the why? Like, what is it that you need from me, kind of thing? Because I know that I can kind of go off in different ways, and sometimes it's not always helpful as a human. But even to bring that into like being a therapist, like, what do you need? Do you want to find solutions? Do you just want me to sit with it with you right now? Like, what is it that we need? So
I feel like that would bring clarity to yourself and others, and that would just clear up everything. Has there been any books or like resources apart from those two psychologists that you think are like, that you gravitate towards?
In terms of resources, I think anything in regards to like nervous system regulation, or like anything like polyvagal theory oriented, like those are always really great ones, because it has more of that like it has a holistic approach, but it's also working very closely with your nervous system. So there's a lot of books by Deb Dana, one of which that's really great is, it's called Anchored. And it's talking about like regulating your nervous system and stuff like that. Another one is also I know this one is connected to one of the psychologists that we talked about, but I'm sure you've heard of it. But The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. It's a really thick book, but it's it's a beautiful book. That's a really great one as well. And I think another one that's kind of at the top of my list, it's called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. So it's kind of working with similar pieces to what I talked about with like acceptance and commitment therapy. It talks a lot about like how the mind can kind of argue both sides of the conversation. And it's like connecting with your own inner knowing and really kind of drilling in the idea that like you are the observer of the thoughts. You're not your thoughts. Like you're just the person who is a witness to them, and kind of figuring out who you are, both inside and outside of that kind of thing.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that sounds really good.
Yeah, yeah, give it a read.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm like, oh, gotta go get that book now. Yeah. I'm trying to think of, what were you talking about? You said there was like the nervous system and then I don't even know the word that you said, like
Polyvagal.
Yeah, polyvagal. What is that?
Yeah, so it's the vagus nerve. So it is the longest cranial nerve in your body. And it wanders all throughout your body. So it's like connected through like your ears, underneath your eyes, the back of your throat, touches all your major organs like your heart, your stomach, your digestive system, your lungs, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's responsible for basically not only, I'm trying to figure out how to kind of word this. It helps, they talk about it in terms of like a tone. So although it's a muscle, or it's not a muscle, it's a nerve, we kind of talk about it in terms of like a muscle, because they say like, oh, you can tone it. So the vagus nerve, it's responsible for that parasympathetic nervous system response. So that is like the parachute. It brings us back down to a place of regulation. So you can activate it yourself by doing different kinds of toning exercises. So like using cold water, connecting with your breath. There's different like movements with your eyes and your neck that you can do. There's a bunch of different kinds of exercises and stuff like that you can kind of do yourself to improve your own toning of your vagus nerve. So they refer to it as toning because if you have like a low vagus tone, it'll take you a little bit longer for that parasympathetic nervous system to kind of kick in there. If you have a higher vagal tone, it'll kick in a lot faster, kind of thing. So like if you and I are walking on the street and we almost kind of get hit by a car, if I have a low vagal tone, it might take me, 3 or 4 days until I feel regulated again, right? After, that would be something scary. My nervous system would kind of be shaken up about it. If you have a high vagal tone, you might be shaken up about it for a couple hours. So you're like, oh, you know what, I'm fine. I can go about my day, kind of thing, if that makes sense. So it's we talk about it in terms of like anxiety pieces. We also talk about it in terms of like depression. We work with it a lot with trauma as well, because our nervous system, although we don't realize it, it is responsible for a lot of our behavior that we don't realize, right? But like whether it's we're approaching something or whether we're retracting from something, whether we're shutting down, like it's in more of our behavior than we realize. So it's always kind of at the core with a lot of work that most therapists do of really connecting with and regulating that nervous system, because sometimes and most times it's easier to kind of communicate safety to ourselves by showing it safety versus telling ourselves I'm safe by like working with our thoughts, if that makes sense. So it's more of that bottom up approach of using the body to communicate safety to the body versus trying to use our brain to tell ourselves we're safe.
Yeah. It sounds like similar to, I think it's called signal detection theory, where I think it's basically just talking about the same thing, but it's like used in anxiety and like exposure therapy. It's talked about in thresholds, and like if you have like a low threshold, it means that you're easily aroused, or if you have like a high threshold, it means that you're not as aroused. Yeah. So I think like it's similar kind of ways of seeing it, but I think it was really cool to hear about like the toning, because it's more of like a practical tool where you can like use it, and then you could like use things like breath work and even like humming. Like I know like I hum like vowels sometimes to like open it, and I feel like that calms it. Yeah, but it's cool to like learn about all the different ways of like imagining it too, because I think that opens up the availability of like resources that we have.
Yeah. And I think too, like referring to it as a muscle, like it also helps people like understand the practice of it, rather than it being like, a lot of times when we give any sort of skill, like they think like, oh, I'm going to do this breathing exercise and it's going to be fine. Like it's, you know, it's going to cure everything in this very moment. But it's like, it's all a practice. It's all like a training. So like a muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it'll get, kind of thing. So like a great way to look at it too.
Is it always the goal to, I don't know what the terminology would be, have a strong parasympathetic nervous system to be able to down-regulate yourself? Or is there utility in having both? Do you know what I mean? Like being able to calm yourself quickly, but also have a low vagal tone where you perhaps are not as adaptable. Is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think.
We're like,
yeah. I think the goal is to essentially, like, there's always going to be dysregulation, right? Like the whole point of life is not to always be within that window of tolerance, of being grounded, of being, you know, having that activated. There is going to be stuff that kind of brings us outside of the window of tolerance. It's more so, you know, when I feel like I'm overwhelmed or I feel like this is too much, how can I bring myself back into these pieces of feeling safe, of feeling connected, of feeling grounded, right? Like that balance of let me feel my emotions, but also how can I be stabilized as well in that moment.
Yeah. And I feel like even just having the tools in the toolbox to be like, oh, I know how to change like my reactions right now, is more of that thing of like, I'm more confident to go out into the world because I know that like if something happens, there's a tool that I've been practicing that I can like use.
Right. Yeah. And learning how to trust themselves, because that's what comes up for a lot of people, especially with anxiety. It's like, well, what if this happens? And it's like, well, what if it does happen? And it's like, it's the ability of, you know, learning, okay, well, if it does happen, I can trust that in that moment I'll be able to handle it. I'll be able to deal with it. I'll be able to make the decision in that moment or whatever it is that I have to do, knowing that, okay, the what if, she's got it or he's got it. They'll figure it out, right? Trusting future whoever, that they'll be able to figure it out in that moment.
Yeah. I think it's super important as well, just going back a little bit, about being able to calm yourself down, but not confusing that with distracting yourself, like going real full circle. Because I feel like it's very easy to do that. Like, oh, I feel anxious or stressed, so I distract myself rather than actually calming yourself.
It's a huge piece. Yeah,
I think we covered like a lot of different things and got some good input. And then I think like the resources too was good to have, like a couple of different books or different people to further like go into some of these practices or knowledge, which I think is important too.
Yeah. Every time I had a question, you sort of came around to it and I was like, well, I've got nothing now.
I'm glad.
Awesome.
It was like, yeah, cool.
Awesome. I'm glad I was able to answer your questions and I didn't kind of make it feel more confusing or make you feel like, what? Like, that didn't really answer my question, but.
No, it was really clear and like super informative. Like, it was awesome.
Yeah. I think a lot of people will get some value. So that's
get
good.
some value and resonate with it as well. Because like I think these are all things that make sense when you say them and you go, oh, okay, yeah, that is true for me. And you can see how it kind of shows up in your life and how you're embodying it in your daily life. And even like I think the values thing is a really practical idea that we can all kind of use and just reflect on. If we can go, okay, are we living in line with our values? If not, like, what are we doing well? And then what do we kind of want to expand on, or what areas of our lives can we expand on to bring more of that into our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was so lovely to speak to you, Jenna.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. It's been great hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Anytime.